everybody, Eric back with you here at AMTC 2022, here with Miles Dunagan. Excited to be able to have a talk about just culture, decision making from the flight crew side, and really look at it from the pilot perspective. Excited to be able to share the industry and with such a great guy.
Well, I appreciate that, Eric.
Yeah.
And we won't tell everybody just how much I'm having to pay you to say all those cool things, but man, it's the honor is mine. And on behalf of NMSPA, I'm very excited to be here with you today.
Well, awesome. Yeah. So we met actually a few months ago and a mutual strategic meeting that we were at. And I thought you were very well spoken, loved really what you were doing in the industry for advocacy and safety, and really feel like that's a topic we don't talk enough about. I know in my education career teaching around the country, that's definitely an area that I see that it's not that these companies don't focus on safety. It definitely is a hot topic, and it's always looked at. And I think the big companies specifically really do all say the same thing. And I feel like they do and say the same thing, right? It's the new provider coming in, right? And they don't know what they don't know. Right. And even though you might say, hey, 3 to go, 1 to say no, or you say, hey, speak up if you don't feel comfortable. What I see and what I've seen as a flight paramedic FTO is you get a new provider working, they're going to rely on you as an experienced provider to tell them if something's dangerous or not.
Exactly.
They're not going to know. You might get a rare person that has good instincts, that is like, you know what, this doesn't seem right, but that's just not the norm.
Sure.
So you have a completely different perspective. And so that's what I want to talk about, is just the just culture part of it, but really what you've learned from the pilot side and sure, what your mission is.
Okay. Well, as the National EMS Pilot Association, I'm the past president, but I'm now serving again as president. Mark Scoville was our president, and he has stepped out of the industry, so that puts me back into the presidency. But our organization represents the roughly 4,000 EMS pilots across the country, and we do have international members as well. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to advocate for the pilot. We're trying to be a voice for a pilot. We believe that good outcomes for pilot means good outcomes for clinicians, open communications with all parties, being the ComSpec, the maintainers, management, everybody working together, pulling in the same direction. If we have that good communication, effective communication, good outcomes will follow. Now, from the Just Culture piece, I remember when I was first introduced to Just Culture by a gentleman named Michael Frakes. He's from Boston Med Flight. Mm-hmm. I was at Life Flight Eagle. A good friend of mine, Joe Coons, invited me up there for Safety Day 2013. And I remember Mr. Frakes asking me about Just Culture, or asking everyone in the room, and I was the only person in the room that didn't raise their hand. I'd never heard the term. Yeah. And then he asked the question, well, so everyone here is CAMES accredited, of course, if you're under Just Culture, and everybody, again, in the room except me, raised their hand. And we had 50 clinicians and pilots representing a number of operators in the Midwest, Life Flight Eagle being in Kansas City, Missouri. And so he kind of stepped back, and I'm front row center, and Michael said, so I'm sorry, sir, are you here for the EMS Safety, Aviation Safety Day? And I went, well, yes. And he said, well, what program are you with? And I said, well, I'm with Hospital Wing in Memphis, Tennessee. Or I said, I'm with Hospital Wing. And he said, oh, you're in Nashville? I said, no, actually down the road, we're in Memphis. And he said, well, let me step back and start and explain a little bit about CAMES and about Just Culture. And that's where it began. And then, unfortunately, not too long after that, our program, like within just over a month, had its first accident. We had 52,000 flights or 56,000 flights without even a bloody nose. And we had a triple fatality accident that occurred. And I remember now that there was a real emphasis on safety. We needed to work on a Just Culture. We needed to strive to become CAMES accredited. And that's how that progress really began to happen. And I blame or thank Michael Frakes for being a voice, and Joe Coons and all the safety advocates that I've met along the way. But, the perception was when I brought Just Culture into that program and started introducing it. And I was actually able to reach out to a gentleman. Memphis is the hub for FedEx. The world headquarters is right there. And they had a gentleman that was phenomenal that really took me under his wing and helped me on that Just Culture journey. But I remember a number of the pilots, a number of the clinicians coming to me and saying, well, this is just a free get out of jail card. And I said, oh no, contrary to that, it is an accountability card. If human error falls into, or human error, at risk, and reckless, those behaviors are what we encounter. And, you will react to those three different, there's a fourth one that we don't even talk about, disregard, willful disregard, if you will. But the human error, at risk, or reckless, you're going to console, you're going to coach, or, there might be, punitive action on that third. But the bottom line is it's accountability. If you see something and don't speak up, and this is a big part of Just Culture for me, if you see something and you keep going and you don't speak up, well, then that's on you. You're now letting down your team because that's an expectation. You're failing to produce an outcome by the expectation giving. If you see something that doesn't seem right, you're supposed to speak up. So for me, the Just Culture from the pilot standpoint is everybody pulling in the same direction, everybody working together. And then takes us to 2008, 2009 in our industry. We talked about it a little bit, Eric. That was a terrible time. 2008 to 2009, we lost the numbers. I've heard 28, I've heard 29 fatalities in our industry during that time. And I remember, and I'm aging myself, I remember I would open my Nokia flip phone and I would look to see, every day, was I going to get a text on another program that had another accident? And so working with NMSPA, the NTSB, the FAA, NMSPA, the different organizations, the flight paramedics, the flight nurses, flight physicians, all work together to come up with policies and initiatives to try to stem the flow, to try to make it to the chances of those accidents to because let's face it, we were flying aircraft devoid of any malfunctions, any mechanical irregularities. We were crashing them into the ground. Why was this happening? And then we started looking at it, and a lot of really, really smart folks got together and we started discussing, there needs to be, we need to learn from our friends in the airline industry. We need to take what they did, and that equated into the CRM piece, the AMRAM piece, the accountability piece, not just the stick and rudder skills, but working together. And that's where initiatives like NMSPA's en route decision point came forward. That is basically it gives you three options. If you encounter bad weather as a helicopter pilot, my neck kind of cranes forward, as if getting 2 inches closer to the windshield is going to make the weather better, right? And I'm going to reach over with my left hand. I'm going to start easing down on the collective. My right hand, I'm going to start easing back on the cyclic, but I'm getting lower and I'm getting slower. And there has to be the problem is guys and gals wanting to continue into that IFR environment while trying to maintain VFR. That's what puts our people in the ground. That's what causes memorial services to happen. That's what we had to stop. So the en route decision point is pretty simple. It's you set up a minimum safe altitude for that route of flight, or you set a minimum deceleration speed or a trigger point where we're going to descend to a certain altitude. We're going to take one of three options. Or if we decelerate to down by 30 is what we call the protocol. If you decelerate by 30 knots, we're going to take one of the three options. But we're going to either turn around. Nowadays, and remember, this all came about in 2010, 2011, after those terrible years. It was all pretty much that. It was sort of rare to find an EMS helicopter with an autopilot. But now the industry has stepped forward, and I use Airvac Life Team as an example.
Yeah.
Every aircraft that they have has an autopilot.
Yeah.
So the en route decision point works great. We just do a 180-degree turn and go back to the weather's good with altitude assist, keeping us away from what's going to hurt us, the ground. Or if it's the better option is to just simply land right there, we land right there. Or we take the third option, which is going ahead, committing to the IFR environment, but using your autopilot and either getting vectors to where the weather is VFR or shooting an instrument approach and recapturing. That third option, when I was young in this industry in 2006, 2007, that third option of that instrument approach was something that we weren't terribly proficient at unless we practiced it. Well, that's still the same. And with more aircraft out there having the autopilot, it's something we need to be doing on a regular basis. And that's practicing those instrument recovery approaches. I find myself, man, at 50 years old, I find myself being a history teacher as much as anything, because we've got guys and gals coming into this industry, young professionals, full of excitement, full of vigor, full of intensity, but they don't know what you and I encountered back in those days.
Yeah.
And so I find myself being somewhat of a history teacher, explaining this is why we do the pre-departure risk assessment. This is why we find what our minimum safe altitudes are. This is why we pre-program instrument approaches just when the weather starts to get a little bit crummy, so that we've built our nest, so we're not behind the eight ball when the bad things start to happen. We're a little bit ahead of the game. Again, our chances of good outcomes goes up exponentially. So that's part of what NMSPA does, is we remember what we went through, and then we do what we can to help not have to go through that again. We want to trap the errors before they happen, and that's what NMSPA is doing. Advocacy for the pilots, which we believe, as was said earlier, we believe that means advocacy for the clinicians as well, because good outcome for pilots historically means good outcomes for the clinicians as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's all great stuff. And I remember 2008 vividly. I mean, I was actually flying in Chinle, Arizona when the Flagstaff Guardian crash happened, right? Midair. I came in an hour after the crash, and we flew over the site, and, obviously clear blue 62. And that was one of those freak things that unfortunately happens. But I remember that those few years. I think what I want to ask you is for that new nurse, that new paramedic. I think you really highlighted from a pilot's perspective. You're in the aircraft. You have a plan. You have your emergency procedures. You have those limits, right? We as clinicians have the same thing.
Right.
But let's go back further. So you as a pilot, you get the flight request. The way it should be is the crew should have nothing to do with that decision making, right? You are going to accept the flight based on weather conditions, right? And that you should already have briefed the crew that, hey, we're going to be VFR all day, or hey, we might have thunderstorms, blah, blah, blah. But where I see the discrepancy is that decision to go. Just like maybe I have a different comfort level for a certain patient versus a new person that I'm just now working with. Let's say we have a vented patient. I have a higher comfortability on that patient. You have a much higher threshold with weather, right? Whatever your background is, maybe you flew in different minimums. And I definitely have seen that. Every pilot is a little different. How does, and I hope I'm not confusing this, but ultimately the crew has to feel empowered and know enough to be able to say, hey, why are we going? Why are we going? Or maybe it's to the point where, hey, you know what, we're going to lift off, and then, you might see something that you don't feel comfortable with.
Sure.
That's where I see the discrepancy is that, or being fearful. I've been in many situations where I've flown with the same people, and I definitely felt like we should not be going based on once we lifted off, right? Benefit of the doubt. And I would make the call, say, hey, I don't feel comfortable. And then my partner would say, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Didn't want to say anything. Didn't want to be the one that says something. And I think that's a problem. And I don't know where that comes from. What advice can you give along those lines?
Well, I've seen that, because, nobody wants to be the one to speak up, oftentimes. And it historically is usually the person who is newest on the crew. It's that junior flight nurse that's only had, is on flight number 7 and doesn't want to be the person to, throw down the coin, if you will. Now, but that's unfortunate, because in reality, that's the person you have to be. You have to be the advocate for that crew. So yes, when the pilot accepts the flight, is it okay? What if the medic or the nurse says, or the respiratory therapist says, no? well, then that's okay.
Yeah.
And then if you take off and it looks like, crummy on a cracker, speak up, make it personal. In my experience with the program that I grew up flying for, we had 2 fatal crashes, and those clinicians were the kind of people that would speak up. And so I can't tell you, and I've read countless accident reports from the NTSB, and you sit there and you look at it and you're like, what in the world were they thinking? Why didn't somebody just say, they were on the ground running. Why didn't they just get in an ambulance and shut the aircraft down? Or why didn't they turn? If they'd have just turned 30 seconds earlier, the accident would not have happened. Those Swiss cheese holes would not, have lined up. That cascading chain of events would not have come to end up in an accident. But it's hard to say that. But when the person next to you says, "Yep, I was thinking the same thing. You just beat me to it." Well, you're on the right track. But we need to be empowering those folks to speak up and say that. Let's face reality. From the front seat, as I'm the captain of that aircraft and I'm flying along, as things start to, like you said a minute ago, you said everyone has a plan. Well, when has en route decision point saved my bacon the most? It's historically when the weather was forecast to be lovely and it turned out to be crummy. All right. So, that's out of the norm because we've already talked about it. We've already, we know the temperature dew point was supposed to be 5 degrees. We're supposed to have a 8 to 12 knot wind.
Yeah.
The chances necessarily in our region weren't supposed for it to go IFR or start going down. But when it does, you have to trust that windshield that I crane my neck 2 inches closer to, and I have to believe what I see, and I have to be willing to take the link out of that chain. And you have to empower your crews to say that. The reality of all that is, it's hard as we are pilots. We start getting task saturated. Our ability to talk goes down.
Right.
Usually in crummy weather. I don't know if you've experienced this. I've experienced this, and then post-flight debrief, talking to my crews, we've experienced this. Is Miles, you usually, you'll sit there and talk to a spider monkey for 30 minutes or a doorknob. When you start getting quiet, we know something's up. And so that's when they'll start to ask me questions. It's not a challenge it's just, hey, are we starting to see deterioration in the weather? This wasn't forecast. And then, usually at that point, I'm starting, my alarm bells are starting to go off in my head that, this isn't going well. Mike Tyson has a saying, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. Well, this is the proverbial hit in the mouth when you look out. Well, it was supposed to be great weather. Yeah. I knew we were going to be able to get this patient to that hospital, but that's not what we're faced with. So, it's a tightrope you have to walk because some people don't want to speak up. And then, some people aren't real excited about getting out and flying in crummy weather. And sometimes the weather can start to get crummy, but we're still able to safely and legally complete the flight. But when that comfort level is mixed or is hit, people start speaking up. As a pilot, as a captain of that aircraft, I have to listen. And if they say no more, we have to make a different, we have to come up with that different plan.
Well, and I think what you said is so powerful. I think honestly, it starts with the pilot, right? We were talking before the show, a mutual friend, pilot Kirk Sunley.
Yeah.
Right. And I've gotten to fly with some amazing pilots over 20 years of flying, but he would be my top 2 or 3. And it's not about the piloting skills. He just had the complete package. He made you feel like you were part of every decision.
Sure.
And you trusted him because he was forthcoming and said, "Hey guys, this is what we're going to do. This is what I'm seeing. This is what our plan is. If this doesn't," right. So you automatically felt like you were part of the plan.
Yes.
I've flown with pilots they're just not good at communicating, and you feel like you are constantly trying to pry information out. And I think that is the key, is that it really does start because you are the pilot in command, right? You make that ultimate decision. And once that initial decision is made, then the crew can then chime in and say, "Hey, I don't feel comfortable," or let's ask those questions. I always really try to push new crew members to sit down with a pilot.
Sure.
It's not our job to be able to read weather, but I think you got to know what you don't know. Sure. And you need to have an idea of, hey, you know what? Probably going to have thunderstorms all day. just be aware. I think the awareness is there. I always tried to, I had some pilots that really did take me under my wing, and they were the ones that told me that, you should have an understanding of inversion layers and temperature dew point, and the what are the QT segments. I had a QT log even where because I wanted to understand,
Sure.
Why are we going to fly at a higher altitude?
Sure.
Well, it's because we have a tailwind
Sure.
up there,
Sure.
right? And maybe I'm pretty weird about stuff like that. I want to know, why a decision is being made, but that is so powerful. And so I really encourage you guys listening is to have those conversations with the pilot. Have during your morning brief or your evening brief with that pilot. That's the time, especially for you new crew members, is to build that relationship and have the conversations then. But I think it really does start with the pilot. It starts with the pilot to make the crew members feel comfortable to have those conversations. Because once you know that nothing is off limits, they'll be free to speak up.
Absolutely. Well, and there was a lot in there, man. There was a lot there. Well, no, but it's awesome. But one of the things that we have to do a better job at in EMS and aviation EMS, fixed wing or helicopter, is we have to do a better job at leading our pilots, the captains of these aircraft. We have to be doing a better job at educating them on the expectation. It's not, the days when I started was, you're a good little pilot, here's your helicopter, don't hurt anybody. Well, that's okay, but there are a lot of different personalities. Not everybody's a chatty Cathy like me. Not everybody is just that way. Okay. That's just the reality so you might go to someone, or someone might come to me and ask a question, and I'm going to tell them how, what time is it, Miles? Well, here, let me show you. This is how you build a Seiko watch.
Yeah.
This is how that happens, where everybody is not that way. But the open communication is something that all of the pilots have to possess. We have to be doing that with our clinicians. We have to be doing that with our comm specs. We have to be doing that with our mechanics. In order, if there's not good, effective communication, chances of those good outcomes goes way down. So that's something that, and perhaps it's in a mentorship. I know some really great pilots, guys and gals that do it, throw on the boots at 2 a.m. and go out there and step into people's nightmares. They communicate like Kirk Sunley. I know a number of them, but, is there a way for us to set up a mentorship for pilots to help give the expectation? All right. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but we want those good outcomes. And I believe firmly, if you read the NTSB reports that are out there, I believe you'll agree that communication, historically, effective, healthy communication would have kept a number of the accidents in our industry from occurring. And so that helping teach that, I believe, is a big piece of the puzzle, is what will help garner the good outcomes, help create that environment. The companies are doing a lot of the hard work. I've mentioned Airvac Life Team putting autopilots in all of their aircraft. They've also fleeted their aircraft out to where when I was with Airvac Life Team, had I gone and flown in Corinth, Mississippi at Airvac 58, and then I went and flew in Texas at a base, all the switches were in the exact same place.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so that standardization of the cockpit layout from a pilot standpoint is huge. Now, you asked me a minute ago about making it personal or how do you do that? Well, for me, this is how I do it and how I've done it. And this comes from my dad. My dad flew EMS starting in 1970 for the Memphis Police Aviation Unit. He passed on just a few years back, but I used to, ask him how, I would ask him a question like, well, what were your minimums then? And he kind of, minimums? We didn't have minimums. We were public service. They were EMTs, and they were in a 206B model. They were just doing scene flights in Shelby County. They could apply oxygen and pressure on a wound, and that was pretty much it. And transport to John Gaston, which is now Elvis Presley Memorial Trauma Center. So I would ask him questions. Well, how did you know when the weather was bad, Dad? And, when the hair on the back of your head sticks up, that's when it's getting bad. I was like, and then I started looking, I took my, I'm a pilot, so I took my shoes off and, used my calculator, my toes and my finger. I was like, Dad, I'm lucky to have been here because I wasn't born until 72. And you started doing this in 70 with absolutely no minimums. And it was the wild, wild west. He said, yeah, but it was different. It weren't the towers that we have now and all this stuff. I said, but Dad, he said, I know, son, I was very lucky. I was blessed to have made it through that. I say all that to say it was a different environment then. But one of the things he told me is that as I was growing up flying with my father, he always told me, if you won't take your mom with us, if you won't put one of your sisters on board with us, if don't go. And now it's, if I won't put my wife or I wouldn't put one of our 6 kids on the aircraft with us, I don't have any business going. Also, if you have to talk to yourself into making the flight, if you have to talk yourself into it for more than about 45 seconds, you're really stretching it. You're really trying to talk yourself into doing something that's probably not a good idea. You see, one of the misnomers is we do rapid transport. We don't fly missions. The young men and young women of our armed forces, they jump in those helicopters and they go out and they kick the devil in the teeth and they do amazing things. They fly missions. We do not fly missions. We make transports. We buy people time. We do our best to get those patients safely with our clinicians, safely to rotor blades, to hot steel, to what's going to help them be safe and what's going to help them survive. Everyone we fly, if it's the safe and appropriate thing to do, they can be put in the ambulance. We have to take out that mission mentality of go, go, go. It's not that. If we can't do it safely, if we can't put our crews, let's face it, we do something, we jump in a helicopter, we go 150 miles an hour, we pick somebody up in the middle of Highway 51, and then we fly back to a trauma center or whatever the appropriate level of care is. We do something very, very difficult that is very, very taxing. It takes us a long time to get where we are proficient at it. We make it look very, very easy. But when things go bad, they can go very, very tragically bad. So the last thing we need to do is cause that accident. I can go on. I could give you 5 shows on the reasons why you don't want to crash, and I'd still have plenty of time. It's the stress on families, of the 2 crews that I've lost, and then I believe my number now is 11 of friends that I had dinner with, that we went to their kids' soccer games and they went to mine, and that are no longer with us because of whatever reason. They were in an air medical accident, but those ripple effects go on forever. Learn from my experience, make it personal. Feel like you can say no, make decisions you can live with. There's all kinds of things to put in your mind. At Apollo Med Flight, we have our first day of education. First thing I do, what is your number one job? And I'll have people say, well, we're concerned about lunch today, or, well, safety. He's a safety director, safety. Yeah, those are nice answers. But what I'm looking for is everyone goes home. If everyone goes home is not our number one job, then we need to really reevaluate what we're doing. I can't guarantee you're not going to have a dirty suit. I can't guarantee you're not going to be tired, but everyone goes home has to be our number one goal. And so I want every clinician, every pilot, every person that's out there that does this job, no matter where they are, I want them to take that with them. Going home is your number one job, okay? It has to be. And if I can ever help someone out, please share my information at the end of the show, but have them reach out to NIMSPA. We have some awesome, pretty cool toolbox tools that we're willing to share with anybody, but going home has to be the number one goal. And that's what we're here talking about at AMTC is, let's get everybody home. And how can we do that? What can we do to help facilitate those good outcomes?
Yeah, no. And to kind of finish this off, I think what you said at the very end was very powerful is, ultimately we're a transport mode. I think sometimes we let our ego think that it's more than that, right? Sure. I understand we're providing a higher level care, but there is an ambulance with a paramedic somewhere.
Sure.
There's an ED with an MD or a mid-level. And maybe we are a higher level care in certain perspectives. Ultimately, though, I think especially when we're new to the industry, you think, hey, well, we're the last option. We've got to take that flight for that child or whatever. And that's why you got to leave out what type of call it is, what type of flight it is, right? Don't be part of that decision making. That's where the pilot should get that request. And I flew fixed wing for a couple of years, and we didn't even know what type of patient it was until the flight was accepted. We didn't even know there was a flight until we got a phone call. The pilot already accepted the flight. That's how different it was, which I thought was great. Right.
Sure.
And so I think that's the thing is recap really a lot of what we said. It's open lines of communication, having those conversations, knowing it's all right to say no. It really does start with a company. It starts with that first day of orientation that you said, right? And letting the crew member know that it's all right, right? We want you to provide excellent care and to our patients, but ultimately you need to go home to your family. So we need to make the right decisions. We need to talk and communicate. And I think what I would end, and I use a lot of examples in our review course of, that objective, your gut instinct, right? If you feel like your pilot or your partner is not acting right, if they seem like they're tired or fatigued or just not right, you got to say something. And I think obviously we learned a lot about that air evac incident. We did a podcast called Imagining the Unimaginable, where we talked about that. The autopilot that you referred to saved that crew's life.
Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. They would not be here today.
Absolutely.
And so, I applaud air evac for doing that. And, but again, we got to come together. We got to communicate. We got to empower conversation. So
absolutely. And we got to share those lessons learned. There's nothing that is proprietary in the safety world. I don't care what anyone says. So if there's something that we do at our program that we can share with another organization, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
We want everybody to go home. We don't want any more memorial services. We don't want any more funerals. We don't want to, we just don't want to even go down that road anymore. And that starts with open communication and working together. So if we can have that, we're going to have those good outcomes.
Perfect. Well, Miles, hey, thank you for taking the time. We've tried to get together all day. It's been busy. Super appreciative. I know we will share your contact information. And so again, thank you. And for just as always, if you have any questions, if you have any case studies, if you have anything you want to hear specific to the podcast, please reach out, Eric.Bauer at FlightBridgeED.com, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
This has been a production of the FlightBridgeED Podcast, leading the way in pre-hospital critical care and emergency medicine education.